The email came through just after midnight, glowing coldly on Ethan Rowe's cracked phone screen in the middle of a tent city near the Chilean coastline. He had just finished a 14-hour shift, pulling survivors from the rubble of a collapsed apartment block. Dust still clung to his boots, his back ached, and the only thing he wanted was sleep. But there it was. Subject line. "Let's handle this like adults." 3 lines of text. That's all it took to unravel 11 years of marriage. Lauren had filed for divorce. She'd emptied their joint account. And she'd moved someone named Blake into their home in Flagstaff. No apology, no explanation. Just a clean break, as if she were canceling a gym membership. Ethan blinked twice, closed the message, and stood in stunned silence as the generator outside the tent hummed on. His hands felt numb. His pulse thudded against the roof of his skull. Somewhere nearby, a baby wailed under the blue tarp of a makeshift clinic. He stepped into the dim light of the field shower trailer, letting the cold water hit his shoulders like a slap. No one said anything. He didn't either. That night, back in his cot beneath a threadbare wool blanket, he replied with one word. Understood. No anger, no bargaining, just a dead silence that said more than any reply ever could. His crewmate Rhett looked over from the bunk across the aisle, eyes squinting through the dark. "You all right, man?" Ethan didn't look up. "Just family stuff." Rhett gave a quiet nod. In a place where people saw death daily, they knew when not to press. Ethan lay there, eyes open, listening to the wind beat against the canvas. He wasn't angry yet. He was calculating. And this was far from over. The signs had been there. Quiet, almost polite in their betrayal. About 5 months before his deployment, Ethan began noticing changes in Lauren that didn't quite scream infidelity, but whispered something was off. She stopped asking how his shifts went, stopped laughing at his dumb rescue stories, the ones she used to say made her proud. She'd picked up extra hours at the wellness spa, came home late, always smelling like eucalyptus and someone else's cologne, said she was just exhausted, started wearing perfume again, new yoga pants, fresh highlights. She'd bought a second phone charger and kept it in her car. He noticed, but said nothing. Ethan wasn't the jealous type. Being a paramedic had taught him that people lie best in the everyday moments. When they kiss you good morning but don't look you in the eye. Still, instead of confronting her, he prepared. Quietly, cautiously. While Lauren binge-watched true crime shows and scrolled through real estate listings at night, he rented a small storage unit on the far side of town. Into it went a locked fireproof box, his birth certificate, military discharge papers, the title to their Toyota, and his late mother's worn recipe book. He rerouted part of his paycheck into a separate account Lauren didn't know existed. Not much. Just enough that if something went wrong, he wouldn't be starting from zero. Trust your gut, his field instructor had told him a decade ago. That voice echoed every time Lauren smiled too brightly while texting someone she wouldn't name. The day before his deployment, she hugged him at the airport with dry eyes and cold fingers. "Stay safe, okay?" she said, like she was talking to a coworker, not her husband. That's when he knew. He was already halfway out of her life. She just hadn't told him yet. Ethan had always believed in building slow, steady things. That's why he fell for Lauren in the first place. She was grounded, practical, warm in a way that felt like home. They met during a CPR certification class at a community college in Phoenix. She was finishing her certification to become a veterinary technician. He was there renewing his paramedic credentials. He cracked a joke during the compressions demo, and she didn't laugh, but she smiled later when he offered her the last blueberry muffin from the vending machine. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something real, and that mattered more. They married the following spring and bought a small cabin-glass home tucked into the pine-covered hills outside Flagstaff. 2 bedrooms, a screened-in porch, a patchy garden out back that Lauren once tried to turn into a meditation space. The house wasn't much, but it was theirs. Ethan used his VA loan to get it started. Lauren picked out the paint colors in the kitchen tile. Even though the mortgage was in his name, he added her to the deed. "We share everything," he'd said. That was the whole point of marriage, he'd thought. No secrets, no separate corners. Over the years, they faced the usual storms. Tidal months, health scares, Ethan's trauma from accident scenes that clung to him like smoke. But they also had laughter, long road trips with bad playlists, and lazy Sundays spent drinking coffee and fixing up their old porch swing. When his mother passed from pancreatic cancer, Lauren was the one who held him up. When her dog died, he was the one who dug the grave. They had history, they had roots. Or at least, Ethan thought they did, until he realized Lauren had been quietly sawing through them long before she left. 2 weeks after that cold, calculated email, Ethan sat alone on a folding chair in the corner of the camp's mess tent, halfway through a stale protein bar when his phone buzzed. A notification from the shared bank account. They still hadn't officially separated assets. Another withdrawal. He opened the app and stared. $61,250, 0 cents. The remaining balance, $14.37. His thumb hovered, frozen, as he flipped through the transaction history. The timeline was damning. Small transfers began just days after he boarded the plane for Santiago. Bigger ones followed. His stomach turned. Their emergency savings, built carefully over the years, meant for a future home renovation or the kids they never had, drained in less than a month. That night, while others gathered around laptops to FaceTime their families or joked over instant coffee, Ethan sat beneath a dim bulb outside the supply trailer and logged into their home security system, something Lauren had probably forgotten existed. The feed loaded slowly. When it did, the first thing he saw was a black pickup he didn't recognize parked in his driveway. Then there was Blake, shirtless, sunburned, walking their Labrador Scout, like he'd lived there for years. Inside, Lauren stood in the kitchen, wearing Ethan's old hoodie, laughing as she stirred something on the stove. She leaned in, kissed Blake on the cheek. The same kitchen Ethan had gutted and rebuilt the previous summer, alone, because she said she wanted a fresh start. A part of him cracked then, not out of jealousy, but out of cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a fling. It was a takeover. His home, his life, his name, all being rewritten while he was sleeping on a cot in another country. The next morning, Ethan didn't go numb. He got organized. Because she'd declared war and he was finally ready to answer it strategically. Ethan had learned long ago that revenge didn't have to be loud to be devastating. It just had to be smart. That morning, he pulled out his weather-worn field notebook and began sketching a checklist, not of gear or protocols, but of legal moves. First, he emailed Reese Maddox, an old firefighting buddy turned civil attorney in Flagstaff, with the subject line, "What came next left Ethan breathless." Reese had pulled up the property records and found something damning. A refinance application filed just 6 weeks prior. It was submitted in both Ethan and Lauren's names, but the signature beside his wasn't his. Close, but wrong stroke patterns, a missing middle initial, and a date he hadn't even been in the country. First, the loan had already gone through. Lauren and Blake had pulled $295,000, 0 cents, in equity from the house. Ethan's name was on the loan, but Blake's was listed as a co-applicant. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. "She forged my name and added a guy with a fraud record as her partner," he said slowly. Reese confirmed Blake had a shady past, 2 pending lawsuits for breach of contract and an arrest for identity theft a few years back. "This isn't just betrayal," Reese added, his voice dark. "It's a felony." Ethan felt something settle in his chest, not grief, not even fury, just precision. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about leverage. And if Lauren thought Ethan was the type to roll over quietly, she'd misunderstood the man who'd pulled broken bodies from car fires and held dying hands in the back of ambulances. He didn't fall apart under pressure. He planned. And now, he was planning for her. 3 days later, Ethan was on a red-eye back to Arizona, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, wearing a borrowed cap and sunglasses. He didn't call Lauren, didn't warn anyone, just booked a quiet room at a roadside lodge an hour outside Flagstaff under the name Eric Warner, and met Reese the next morning at a Greasy Spoon diner. Over burnt coffee and dry hash browns, they went over everything. Reese handed Ethan a folder filled with printouts. Forged refinance documents, property records, timestamps of wire transfers. "We go to the bank first," Reese said. "Let them see what they missed." At First Ridge Credit Union, the loan officer who'd processed the paperwork turned pale when Ethan presented his military ID and pointed out the mismatched signatures. "I didn't sign this," Ethan said, flatly, laying down his driver's license for comparison. The officer, a middle-aged man with nervous eyes and a trembling pen, stammered an apology before saying, "I'll need to report this immediately." Ethan nodded. "Already filed a police report this morning." The refinance account was frozen on the spot, but the damage had already begun. According to the ledger, $146,000, 0 cents, had been siphoned to an external account over the last 30 days. Far too much to be coincidence. "Any idea where it went?" Ethan asked. The officer hesitated. "We're not supposed to disclose recipient details without a subpoena." Ethan leaned forward, calm and unblinking. "My signature was forged, my house was used for collateral, and my money is gone. I'm not asking for gossip, I'm asking for justice." After a pause, the officer turned his monitor. "Recipient, Jordan Kelly." Ethan's eyebrows lifted. "That's not Blake." Reese leaned in. "We've got a new player," he muttered. "And I bet this one's dirtier than the rest." By the time the sun dipped behind the pines that evening, Reese had already dug up a file on Jordan Kelly, and it wasn't pretty. Kelly ran a cash loan real estate flipping business based out of Mesa, specializing in distressed properties and expedited sales. More notably, his name had appeared alongside Blake Renshaw in at least 4 prior property transfers, all involving women whose spouses were away in military deployments. Offshore jobs, medical residencies. Each home had been refinanced, stripped of equity, then sold under market value within 6 months. The pattern was too clean to ignore. Reese called a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Within 24 hours, Ethan was sitting in a federal field office across from Agent Nadia Diaz and Agent Rob Stanton, laying out every document, timestamp, and video recording he and Reese had collected. "You may have just handed us the case that ties this all together," Diaz said, scanning the forged loan forms. "We've been watching Renshaw and Kelly for a year, but no one's brought us something this clean." Ethan sat still, the only sound in the room the soft hum of the air vent above. "You're saying I'm not the first," Stanton nodded. "Unfortunately, no. We've got at least 8 similar cases across 3 states. But your evidence shows intent, a working partnership between Blake and Kelly, and a clear victim left holding the debt." Ethan leaned back in the chair, hands clasped. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even sad. He felt something far more focused, useful. His heartbreak had been weaponized into proof that might stop this from happening to another unsuspecting husband halfway across the world. The betrayal had been personal. But now, the fight was bigger, and Ethan wasn't backing down until it was finished. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. "We need to talk. It's not what you think." He stared at it for a moment, unreadable, then slid the screen off and tossed the phone on the motel bed. Reese had warned him, "Don't engage. Not yet." Instead, they set a plan. At 9:30, Ethan parked across the street from Ethan's old home. Engine off, coffee cooling in the cup holders. At 9:45, Lauren exited the front door and drove off, likely to the park she suggested in her message, right on cue. At 10:03, a silver SUV pulled up. The logo on the door read, "Kelly Property Solutions." Blake walked out first, casual and smug, then greeted Jordan Kelly with a firm handshake like they'd done this a dozen times. They walked inside with a third man, camera in hand, clearly a listing agent. Reese raised an eyebrow. "Should we follow them in?" Ethan shook his head. "No need." He pulled up his phone, tapped into the interior security system Lauren had forgotten to disable. The video feed uploaded automatically to cloud storage. On screen, Kelly was walking through the living room, snapping pictures. "List at $460,000, 0 cents, he said. "We'll get a buyer to offer $410, 0 cents, maybe $420, 0 cents. Ethan won't fight it. Military guys never do." Blake laughed. "We throw a little settlement money at him and he disappears." Ethan hit record. Every word streamed live to Agent Diaz. 30 minutes later, FBI vehicles turned the corner. From their car, Ethan and Reese watched as armed agents stormed the house. Blake and Kelly were led out in cuffs, their faces pale and stunned. Ethan didn't move. He didn't need to. His silence had done the work. No shouting, no threats. Just facts, precision, and patience. It was the quiet kind of justice, the kind that lasts. The days that followed moved fast. Faster than Ethan expected. With the footage, forged documents, and federal charges piling up, both Blake and Kelly struck plea deals within weeks. They confessed to orchestrating a three-state scam targeting the spouses of deployed or traveling professionals, flipping homes for profit while leaving their victims buried in fraudulent debt. Blake named Lauren in his statement, claiming she was aware of the scheme but believed Ethan wouldn't fight back. That was all the leverage Ethan needed. Rather than pursue full criminal charges against her, he agreed through Reese to a civil settlement. Lauren signed a legal confession admitting to the forged signature, the refinance scheme, and misuse of marital funds. In exchange for avoiding prosecution, she forfeited any claim to Ethan's pension, their house, and was required to pay full restitution from what remained of her earnings and Blake's seized assets. "I never meant for it to go this far," she told Reese during a closed-door mediation. Ethan never responded. She wasn't owed closure. The house was his again. Every beam, every nail, every memory. But it didn't feel like home anymore. Too many ghosts in the paint, too much silence between the walls. Meanwhile, Agent Diaz called Ethan personally. "Because of your case, we connected them to 9 other victims. You helped us shut the whole thing down." Ethan listened, barely breathing, then simply said, "Thank you." He hadn't asked for this war. He hadn't wanted it. But when it came, he answered with clarity and control, and made sure no one else would fall into the same trap. His world had been hijacked, broken, sold off piece by piece. But now, justice had been served, not with vengeance, but with truth. And for Ethan, that was enough. 1 year later, the house was gone, sold to a quiet couple from New Mexico who loved the porch swing Ethan had repaired twice. He didn't stay for the final walkthrough. He just left the keys in an envelope with a note. "May this place give you more peace than it gave me." With the proceeds, Ethan bought a modest A-frame cabin nestled in the woods outside Sandpoint, Idaho, overlooking a narrow creek that sang through the pines at night. 10 acres of space, no neighbors, no noise, just Scout, his loyal lab, a stack of firewood, and the kind of silence that felt earned, not empty. He took early retirement from emergency response. 20 years on the job was enough. These days, he did small carpentry jobs for locals. Fence repair, shed builds, restoring old porch swings. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Sometimes, at night, he'd sit on the back steps with a thermos of coffee, looking up at the stars, wondering how everything had changed so fast, and why he no longer felt broken by it. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. "You don't know me, but you saved our home," it read. "My husband's a firefighter. We almost fell for the same scheme. The FBI told us about your case. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to disappear." Ethan read it twice, then pinned it to the fridge beside Scout's vaccination records. He didn't think about Lauren much anymore. She'd made her choices, so had he. And out here, where the pine trees whispered and no one knew his story unless he wanted them to, Ethan finally found what he'd fought so hard to reclaim. Not revenge, not pride, just peace. The kind that can't be stolen, the kind that lasts. The story of Ethan Rowe teaches us that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can sharpen you. When his life was torn apart in silence, he didn't respond with chaos or anger. He responded with clarity. Instead of spiraling, he focused, protected what mattered, and let the truth do the work. Ethan's quiet resilience shows that sometimes the strongest move is not shouting for justice, but building it step by step. He teaches us that preparation, emotional control, and self-respect are more powerful than revenge. By refusing to stoop to the level of those who wronged him, he reclaimed not just his house and assets, but his peace. And in helping expose a larger criminal network, he turned personal pain into collective protection. His story is a reminder that you can't always control what people do to you, but you can control how you rise after. When the world takes everything, rebuild something better, something unshakable, something truly yours.